My girlfriend said, "You're too predictable. I need something different in my life." I agreed and let her go without resistance. Months later, she reached out after realizing the different she chose didn't give her stability or respect. "You're too predictable," she said, setting her wine glass down like she was filing a formal complaint with management. "I need something different in my life." I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at her, at Sloan, sitting across from me in the living room of the apartment we'd shared for almost 2 years, and I noticed this strange stillness settle over me. Not shock, not the hot, immediate kind of devastation that makes your throat close and your hands go cold. Something quieter than both of those things. Like a room going completely still right before the sky breaks open. On the surface, those words sounded like a woman who was restless. Bored maybe, reaching for something she couldn't quite name. And there was a version of me, the version that had been in this relationship long enough to reflexively turn her unhappiness into my problem to solve, that immediately started trying to figure out what she meant, what I could fix, what I'd missed. But underneath that first impulse, something else was happening, something I couldn't name yet. What I didn't know in that moment was the full weight of what those words actually carried. I didn't know there was already another name in the conversation, a man she'd been thinking about, a choice she'd already been leaning toward, a door she'd essentially decided to walk through before she ever sat down across from me with that wine glass. I didn't know any of that, but I would. We moved in together after 8 months. That pace felt right to both of us. Not rushed, not slow, just honest. The apartment was good. The life we were building inside it was good. Not perfect. Nothing real is. But the genuine, unglamorous, sustainable kind of good that you only recognize the value of after you've lost it. The conversation that night didn't stop with one sentence. She kept going, methodically, evenly, like she'd rehearsed this. Like she'd been turning these words over in her mind for a while and was finally ready to say them out loud. "You're always where you say you'll be," she said. "You always do exactly what you say you'll do. There's no mystery with you. No tension. Nothing that keeps me guessing." "I thought consistency was something you wanted," I said. She looked at me, and I saw something in her expression that I hadn't seen before. Or maybe I'd seen it and been choosing not to read it for longer than I wanted to admit. A kind of restless pity. Not cruelty. Something more complicated than that. The look of a person who has already made up her mind and is now waiting, almost wearily, for you to catch up to the reality she's been inhabiting in private. "It was for a while," she said. "I don't want it right now." I set down my glass. Not dramatically. Just set it down. "What do you want?" A pause that was long enough to feel like a whole separate conversation was happening inside it. "I want to feel something I haven't felt in a while." "Like what, Sloan?" She shifted slightly, eyes moving to the window for a second before coming back to me. "Uncertain. Alive. Like I'm standing on the edge of something and I genuinely don't know how it's going to go. Like anything could happen." I looked at her for a long time without speaking. And I thought about the night 2 years earlier when she had called me from outside her old apartment at 2 in the morning, crying, because her ex-boyfriend had ghosted her for the 4th time in 6 weeks. I thought about the way she'd described that relationship to me in exhaustive, painful detail in the early months of ours. A war zone, she'd called it once. Like trying to hold water in your hands. I thought about what she'd said when she was finally out of it, when she'd had enough distance to reflect on it clearly. "I just want someone who means what he says. That's all I want. Someone who doesn't make me feel crazy for expecting basic follow-through." I had given her every version of that. Every single day. For nearly 2 years. And here we were. But I didn't say any of that. Because when you love someone, really love them, not as a transaction, but as an actual choice you keep making, you stop reaching for your own defense as the first response. You start trying to understand. You start wondering if maybe they're seeing something you've missed, something that lives in a blind spot so close to you that you can't find it without their help. That impulse, that genuine willingness to question yourself, is something I respect in myself. But it can also be the thing that makes you stand still and stare at a situation that's already in motion, still hoping to understand it, when what's actually needed is just for you to see it clearly. "I need space," she said finally. "Clarity." "Okay," I said. She looked at me like she hadn't heard me correctly. "Okay. Yeah." I stood up slowly, no performance in it. "If you need space to figure yourself out, you should take it. I'm not going to argue with you about your own feelings. and I'm not going to chase someone who's already decided they want out." She waited. I could feel what she was waiting for. The counter-argument. The "but what about everything we've built?" The hands reaching for her, the voice going desperate, the scene that would, in some uncomfortable way, have given her what she needed to justify the decision she'd already made. I didn't give it to her. I walked to the bedroom, sat down on the edge of the bed, and looked at the floor. Not as performance, not as punishment, just genuinely, quietly done with arguing against a reality that had already arrived. The next 3 weeks were mostly logistical. She found a place in Williamsburg with a friend she'd known since college. We divided things the way grown adults do, without ceremony, without cruelty, just the practical mechanics of separating a shared life into its component parts. She took her books, her plants, the framed print she'd bought at a street market in Chelsea that had hung on the bedroom wall since the first month we moved in. I kept the couch, the kitchen things, the lamp she'd always said she didn't like anyway. The morning the last box left, she stood in the doorway for a moment. "I hope you know this isn't because you're a bad person," she said. "I know," I said. And that was the last full conversation we had for a long time. Here's the part one want to be honest about. The weeks after she moved out were not some cinematic portrait of a man thriving immediately. They were quiet in a way that has weight to it. There were nights when I'd be doing something completely unremarkable, making coffee, flipping off a light switch, locking the front door, and I'd feel the particular absence of another person in a room the way you feel a temperature change. Not grief, exactly. More like recognition. This is what it feels like now. This is the new shape of things. I let those moments be what they were. I didn't fight them. I didn't fill them. I didn't immediately start dating someone new or throw myself into work in a way that was really just distraction wearing a productive face. I just sat in it, for as long as it needed to be sat in. And somewhere in those weeks, without making a decision or drawing a line, I stopped expecting to feel better and just started living in the time that was actually in front of me. Pattern interrupt. The call from Hollis. About 3 weeks after Sloan moved out, Hollis called. Hollis is one of my closest friends, has been since we were both 22 and broke in a city that makes no concessions to either condition. He's the kind of friend who tells you the hard thing first because he thinks softening it only makes the landing worse. That night, he paused before saying what he was calling to say. That pause told me everything before the words did. "Have you been looking at her social media at all?" he asked first. "No," I said. "I haven't been looking at anything." "Right. Okay." Another pause, shorter this time. "There's something I think you should know. And I'm only telling you because I think finding out from me is better than finding out some other way." "Say it, Hollis." "It's Prescott." I went quiet. I want to describe this man fairly, without the reflexive villain framing that these kinds of stories sometimes invite. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't evil. He was, simply put, a particular type of man. Good-looking in the way that tends to make people forgive things they probably shouldn't. Charismatic enough to walk into a room and make it tilt slightly in his direction. The kind of person around whom things always felt like they were about to happen, like something was always on the verge of igniting. He was also someone who treated relationships the way certain people treat expensive things they can't quite afford, enthusiastically at first, and then with a creeping carelessness once the novelty faded. Several women in our extended social circle had had some version of a Prescott experience. None of them described it with nostalgia. I'd known who he was for years. I'd never had anything against him personally. He was charming when you encountered him in the right context. But I also knew exactly what he was. "I'm not telling you this to rub it in," Hollis said carefully. "I just thought." "I know why you're telling me," I said, "and I appreciate it. Are you okay?" I thought about the question honestly. "Yeah," I said. "I actually think I am." After we hung up, I sat with what I just learned. And I made a decision that I'm still proud of. I didn't reach out to Sloan. I didn't text Prescott with some ambient threatening message designed to let him know I knew. I didn't spiral into the poisonous loop of comparing myself to him, measuring my reliability against his wildness, my steadiness against his edge, trying to figure out where I'd lost. I didn't perform any version of wounded male dignity. I just kept going. Because at some point, you have to decide whether you're going to spend your energy analyzing why someone chose something else, or whether you're going to put that same energy into the life that's still actually yours. I chose my life. What the next several months looked like, from the outside, probably appeared unremarkable. I woke up early. I worked out. I poured real, focused energy into a project at work that had been sitting at 70% complete for almost a year, and I finished it. I had dinners with Langston and Hollis on weekends, the easy, rambling kind that go 3 hours without anyone noticing. I helped Remington move apartments, spent a weekend in upstate New York with Langston's family, started cooking actual meals instead of ordering delivery every night. I started sleeping better. I started waking up thinking about what I was doing that day instead of cycling through the archive of what I'd lost. And slowly, not dramatically, not with any kind of announcement, the space that Sloan had occupied began to feel less like a wound and more like just part of the landscape. There's a specific kind of freedom that comes when you stop expecting someone to come back, stop rehearsing conversations in your head, stop retrofitting your self-worth to fit the shape of someone else's dissatisfaction. It's quiet. It doesn't announce itself. But one morning you make coffee and you realize you made exactly the amount you actually drink, and you didn't even think about making 2 cups first. That's when you know the corner has been turned. I want to stop here and say something that might be the most important thing in this entire story. At no point during those months did I feel the need to become someone I wasn't. I didn't decide I needed to be more mysterious. I didn't start manufacturing unpredictability. I didn't experiment with being flaky to see if it made people want me more. I didn't look at Prescott and think, maybe I should learn whatever it is he's doing. Because here's the thing about becoming someone you're not in order to be chosen by someone who didn't choose you as you were. Even if it works, you've already lost. You haven't gotten back a relationship. You've just built a new one on the foundation of a performance, and performances eventually end. I was who I was. I showed up where I said I'd be. I said what I meant. I built things carefully, sustained them consistently, and gave people around me the basic dignity of being able to count on me. If that made me predictable, fine. Then I was predictable. But I was also sleeping well, doing work that mattered, surrounded by people who valued what I actually brought, and slowly, without forcing it, moving forward. It was a Thursday evening in November. I'd had a good day, genuinely good, the kind with clean outcomes and clear forward motion. I'd gotten home, changed, made dinner, and was somewhere in the middle of a book I'd been meaning to finish for months. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I picked it up automatically. The number was one I recognized, one I hadn't deleted, not from hope, just from the mild inertia of not getting around to it. I read it once, set the phone face down, picked it back up and read it again. Hey, can we talk? I thought about several things simultaneously, what this meant, what she wanted, what the right response was, who I wanted to be in this moment, what I actually felt when I read those words. I set the phone down and didn't respond that night. The next morning, a second message. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. But I need to talk to someone who actually knew me before all of this. If that's still something you're willing to do, I would really appreciate it. I read this one over coffee. Stood at the window for a while. I thought about not responding at all. Clean, final silence. The kind of non-answer that carries its own message clearly enough. I also thought, and I want to be honest about this, because it matters, that there was a version of me that was genuinely curious. Not romantically, not with hope attached, just with the plain human curiosity of someone who knew a person well and wanted to understand what they'd been through. What had she found on the other side of different? What did the thing she'd run toward look like once she was standing inside it? I'm not going to dress up that curiosity as compassion. It was partly compassion. I did still care about her, in the uncomplicated way you care about people you've been genuinely close to. But it was also partly just a genuine want to understand how the story had continued. I typed, I can talk, but I need you to be honest with me about why you're reaching out. Not soft, just real. She called within 4 minutes. Her voice was different. Not in a subtle way, clearly different. Quieter, lower, pulled inward. The specific tone of someone who has spent a while carrying something that weighs more than they show on the outside. I don't know where to start, she said. Start honest, I said. You don't need to package it. A long exhale, like she'd been holding it. Prescott was everything I said I wanted. In the beginning, when we first started spending time together, it was genuinely everything I described to you. The night I said I wanted something uncertain. The unpredictability. The charge. Every evening felt like something could happen. I felt awake. I said nothing. And for a couple months, that was real. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't, because that wouldn't be fair to you or to me. Okay, I said. But then things started shifting. Her voice dropped a register. He'd cancel plans the night before. Not with an explanation, just a text. Can't make it. Sometimes not even that. Sometimes I'd already be somewhere, waiting, and he'd show up 45 minutes late and act like time was a suggestion that only applied to other people. I listened. He'd go quiet for 3 or 4 days, completely silent, no context, and then come back acting like that was normal. Like absence was just something that happened sometimes, and I was supposed to absorb it without asking. And when I tried to talk about it, not dramatically, not starting a fight, just trying to understand what was going on, he'd make me feel like I was being difficult, like needing to know where someone stood was a character flaw. She paused. There was a night he got genuinely upset with me over something so small I still can't fully remember what it was. Like, objectively minor. He was cold and cutting for a solid hour. And then an hour later he was completely fine, easy, charming, laughing, acting like the previous hour hadn't happened. And I was sitting there trying to figure out which version of the evening I was actually inside. I could hear her take a steadying breath. And I kept telling myself, this is what you asked for. This is the uncertainty. This is the alive feeling you wanted. I kept trying to match his behavior to the story I'd told myself about why I left. I kept looking for a way to make his inconsistency romantic rather than just what it actually was. Which was what? I asked. Disrespect, she said. Very plainly. No drama in it. It wasn't passion. It wasn't edge. It was just someone who didn't know how to consider another person's time or feelings as things that actually mattered. And I kept reframing it. I kept working backwards from his behavior, trying to construct an explanation that made me the problem rather than him. Because if I was the problem, then at least I had some control over it. Silence for a moment. One night in October we were supposed to have dinner. I got to the restaurant first. Waited. 30 minutes. 40. 45-minute mark, a text arrives. Something came up. That was the whole message. Something came up. And I'm sitting at a table for two, bread basket I haven't touched, glass of water that's been refilled twice, looking at the other people in the restaurant like, everyone else here is with someone. Everyone else here was told the truth about where the night was going. She stopped. And I thought about you. The words landed softly. Specifically, I thought about the time you drove 40 minutes in the rain because I texted you I was having a bad night. I thought about how you remembered the name of a college roommate I'd mentioned once, 6 months earlier. I thought about the way you always said what you meant, even when lying or softening would have been so much easier, because you decided that honesty was more respectful than comfort. She took another breath, and I realized that I'd been using those memories as evidence against myself. Like, see, you had this and you called it boring. You had this and you manufactured a complaint about it. You looked at something genuinely good and you decided it must be missing something because it wasn't hard enough to feel real. I want to tell you something I never told Sloan. About 4 months before the wine glass conversation, I'd run into one of her oldest friends at a gallery opening in Soho. A woman named Ellery, someone Sloan had been close with since college, drifted from in the years after, but still spoke about with a warmth that told me the connection had been real. Ellery and I talked for maybe 20 minutes. Mostly about Sloan, whether she was happy, how things seemed, what she'd been like lately. I told Ellery she seemed good, because at the time, I genuinely believed that. But Ellery had said something that I'd absorbed in the moment, and then mostly set aside. She said, Sloan has always had a complicated relationship with things that are actually good for her. When something is genuinely good, not complicated, not a project, just good, she gets suspicious of it. Like she's waiting for the catch. Like something that doesn't hurt can't possibly be real. And sometimes, when the catch doesn't arrive, she manufactures one, just to confirm the fear. I'd nodded at the time. I'd thought Ellery was being uncharitable, that she was projecting something based on an old version of Sloan, a version from a long time ago. But sitting alone in my apartment after that phone call, turning those words over, I thought about them differently. Sloan hadn't left because I was actually predictable in any negative sense. She'd left because she didn't know how to trust good things. She'd looked at what we'd built, the stability, the honesty, the specific safety of being with someone who meant what he said, and she'd experienced it the way some people experience flying through clear weather. Not with relief, with a mounting, anxious suspicion. It's too calm. Something must be wrong. Something must be missing. And she'd gone looking for the turbulence. And she'd found exactly what turbulence actually is. Something that throws you around and costs you altitude and puts you nowhere closer to where you're trying to go. Back on the phone with Sloan, we talked for over an hour. She told me things in that call that I don't think she'd said out loud before. The full arc of it. The early months of feeling electric and alive. The slow, creeping erosion that followed once the novelty of chaos had worn off, and what was left underneath was just a person who didn't consider her a priority. She told me she'd already ended things with Prescott. She told me she'd been in therapy more seriously than before, not just showing up to sessions, but actually using them. That she was trying to understand a pattern she'd identified in herself, something around attachment and trust, and the specific way she'd learned, somewhere much earlier in her life, to associate comfort with danger and discomfort with realness. She was doing the work, and I could hear it. "Why did you reach out to me specifically?" I asked at one point. "Because you knew me before," she said. "Because talking to you means I can't perform a version of this that makes me look better than I am. You know the actual story. You were part of the actual story. And because you're hoping I'll come back," I said. A pause. "Yes," she said. "Honestly, yes. I need to tell you something," I said. "And I need to say it clearly, not because I want to hurt you, but because I think giving you honesty is more decent than giving you what might be easier to hear. Okay, I'm not going to try again with us." The line went quiet. Not because I stopped caring about you. I haven't. You were real to me, and that doesn't just evaporate because the relationship ended. I kept my voice even. "But here's what I've been thinking about since you texted me. You told me I was too predictable. You told me you needed something different. And you went and got it. And it cost you something real. I can hear that clearly. I'm not dismissing how hard that was." "Then why?" "Let me finish," I said gently. She went quiet. "Because I think if we got back together right now, what would actually be happening is this. You'd be using the familiarity of us to skip the rest of the work you're in the middle of. You'd be coming back to something that felt safe, not because you genuinely figured out what you need, but because the unsafe thing turned out to be painful and you need somewhere soft to land." Silence. "And I'd be taking you back for the wrong reasons too," I continued. "Not from a clear, present tense choice. From ego. From wanting to prove that I was worth coming back to. That's not love. That's just two people using each other to feel better about decisions they've already made." She didn't say anything for a while. "I think what you're doing right now, the therapy, the honesty you're bringing to this conversation, the actual work of understanding yourself, that's the right thing. That's the thing worth doing. And it belongs to you. I don't want to be the shortcut that lets you stop doing it." Her voice, when she finally spoke, was stripped all the way down to something very simple. "That's the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me." "Good," I said quietly. "Hold on to that. That's the standard you should be setting." We spoke a few more times over the following weeks. They were shorter conversations, less loaded. Two people navigating a new kind of distance with something approaching honesty. She told me she was staying in therapy, that she was working on a specific pattern, the one she'd identified, with more clarity and commitment than she'd brought to it before, that she'd been sleeping better, that she'd started being more honest with her friends about what she needed. She sounded more grounded each time. I was glad for her. Not in a complicated way, not with an asterisk, just genuinely glad. About a month after those conversations, Langston asked me over drinks whether I regretted how I'd handled it. Not the breakup, the phone calls, the decision not to go back. I thought about it honestly before I answered. "No," I said, "because I think what we had was real. And the only way to keep it real, to honor what it actually was to end it cleanly. Going back would have turned it into something else. Something with a different energy to it." "What kind of energy?" "Rescue. Her rescuing herself by returning to what was familiar. Me rescuing my ego by proving I was worth choosing again." I shook my head. "That's not love. That's two people using the word for something that's actually just comfort and wounded pride." Langston was quiet for a moment. "You've thought about this a lot," he said. "I had the time," I said. 2 months after those calls with Sloan, I started spending real time with Tierney. We'd worked in the same building for almost 3 years. Had been in the same professional orbit without ever quite landing in each other's actual space. The way people can be near each other for a long time, and then one evening something shifts and you can't remember how you spent all that time being near each other without actually talking. That shift happened at a work event in the fall. A conversation that ran about an hour past when I'd planned to leave. A dinner 2 weeks later that started casual and ended with the restaurant gently signaling around us that they needed the table. She was sharp in the way that I find genuinely compelling, not performatively smart, but actually interested. The kind of person who asks a follow-up question that tells you she was listening to the last thing you said rather than just waiting for her turn to speak. On our third dinner, she asked what my last relationship had taught me. I thought about it genuinely, not to have a good answer, but because it deserved a real one. That what looks like a flaw from one angle is exactly what someone else is searching for, I said. She looked at me steadily. Were you called predictable? I laughed. The first real, free laugh I'd had about any of this. Yeah. By someone who wanted chaos. More or less. She shook her head slowly. Not pity. Not performance. Just a quiet, genuine response. That's their limitation. Not yours. Sloan sent one last message. January. A Sunday morning. It arrived unprompted, with no lead up, no context. I've been thinking about something for a while, and I wanted to say it even if you don't respond. I think I was afraid of how good things were with us. When you've spent enough time in hard, chaotic situations, easy starts to feel suspect. Like it can't be real. Like something that doesn't hurt must be missing something important. I turned that fear into a story about you. About you being too one thing. When the truth was I was scared of believing I deserved something that just quietly, consistently showed up. I made that your problem. I'm sorry. I hope she knows what she has. I read it twice. Held the phone for a moment. And then typed. I appreciate that. Take care of yourself, Sloan. Set the phone down. Got dressed. Met Tierney for a walk through Riverside Park on a morning that was cold and completely clear, the kind of January day that doesn't apologize for being what it is. There's something that gets skipped over in the version of this story that usually gets told. People like the part where the person who left comes back. They like the validation arc. The woman realizes what she lost. The man holds the power. Justice is served. But that's not what this story is actually about. This story is about a man who got called predictable and had to decide what that word meant. Whether it was an indictment or a description of something that had always been, quietly, the point. Predictable meant she always knew I'd answer when she called. That I'd be where I said I'd be. That I wouldn't manufacture a problem to seem interesting, wouldn't manufacture distance to seem mysterious, wouldn't manufacture suffering as proof that something between us was real. Predictable meant, you can count on this. And there are people in the world. People who have spent enough time in uncertain, unreliable, chaotic love, who understand that counting on something is not the consolation prize. It is the prize. I didn't need Sloan to come back to know that. I didn't need the full arc of her experience with Prescott to validate what I'd already known about myself. I just needed to be still long enough to stop letting someone else's fear become my self-doubt. And on a cold Sunday morning in January, walking through a park with a woman who was laughing at something I'd said and already planning to argue about something I hadn't said yet, I felt, clearly, quietly, without ceremony, that the room had finished clearing. The space was right. The air was honest. And the life in front of me was mine. She said I was too predictable. I said, okay. And then I let the quiet do the rest.